So, Daisy Hilse Dwyer is a cultural anthropologist, veers on the side of a folklorist, and this book isn't terribly strong in terms of statistics, but I don't think it's strong of that at all. But one way to look at a culture is through its folklore. Now, one thing us Westerners tend to forget is the historicity of some of these things. But there's definitely a difference between what comes out once it leaves the masjid as its source. So we find that some of the aspects of Moroccan culture are aspects that have gone on for a long, long time and nobody knows where they're from. Some things come from the colonial period. Some things are connected to Islam. Some of them are inflections. Some things are more explicit. One of the questions is why, if they know that the religion teaches some of these things, teaches contrary, do they not stand up even for their own rights? We find that some of the so-called oppression by men turns out to be by women. We find out that from disease and otherwise, there tends to be a greater safety in societies like this. The Westerner focuses on economics for the most part, while the so-called Easterner or African or Asian or whatever you want to call them, but Morocco's in Africa, obviously. They focus on the family. There tends to be, like is so common with traditional societies, we have the male becomes cultured and the female switches from culture to nature. Islam puts the two together. We have people who are going to focus on fantasies, on the war, on the resistance to Western power. They're going to focus on reports of crime, of stuff that's even less common. America has most of what the world would call honor killings. Honor killings, half of our murders are probably honor killings. If you look at the aspect of, oh, well, someone feels disrespected and they want revenge personally, not just going after someone because of some crime, but these things aren't acceptable in any of the cultures that we talk about. There is no culture where honor killings are legal. In Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Jordan or something, they will kill everybody involved. So some, they don't have the death penalty, but what do folk tales do? Folk tales convey experience. They convey values. They give a connection, particularly to the women who don't go to the places of worship because their sphere is more along the home line. Because our first teachers are our mothers, so the folk tales, whether they be of spirits of Aisha, Kandisha, or whether they be European tales that came in with the colonialization that got changed. But there is certainly a better form of entertainment than our mere fiction are fiction that is not, it doesn't serve a purpose. Now, anybody can tell a folk tale. It's not just subject to the mystics with very good reputation. It's not just subject to the scholars of religion. Folk tales are more open in the forms, and they inflect all over the place. And I don't. This is in particular about the Tarodont, which I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Same with a couple other terms because of the French component. Now, many traditional societies will exaggerate the separation of the male and the female. Islam says a woman can go out for her needs, whatever her needs are, without anybody's permission. That there are certain differences between the male and the female interactions when they interact among themselves versus the others. But, some of these things are taken too far. The exaggerations, like, for example, the circumcision in many African cultures is not only done when the child is old enough to enhance the trauma. You do find psychological differences overall detrimental to the people who are circumcised when in the 8th day of life or some other such thing. But there were two myths. One you're not finding amongst these Moroccan people is the idea of the dirtiness, or they're going to behave themselves better. But you do find presence of the idea, they behave themselves better because they would threaten the people, particularly the boys who were close to being circumcised, that, the mothers would threaten them with scissors and stuff like this to get them to behave. But the male was supposed to maintain a certain composure before or after circumcision. It was just some event. The menarche has almost completely lost its colonialization has brought a degree of embarrassment to menstruation of the women rather than their acknowledgement as women and their placement as adults in the society to make their own decisions and stuff like this. That changed a bit. So young women are hiding some, for months, some for years, I guess, that they are women. And the boys, the girls are raised to be particularly helpful. The men are, they all have their helpful part, but the boys are especially encouraged to leave the house and go off and either work for the older males or play or something to get them ready for later in life. And there's a stigma to people who take more time with their wives. You have some rights that the rights for either male or female were reduced because of cultural things that happened later. But some rights have came back with the spread of Islam. But you see a lot of sorcery that would take people out of the fold of Islam going on with these groups, like people who have extramarital sex, acts of sorcery where they collect the fluids of the other and burn it. Potions dealing with the evil eye and controlling the husbands and all sorts of stuff. if you want to please a husband, why can't you just do stuff like, I don't know, have the smell of cooking around the house, a constant thing, that it hasn't been too long since something's been cooked in there, so he smells the herbs. You don't have to light so much incense that it causes the death of infants, which does happen. Um, Various charms of different sorts. Um, Modesty, of course, being exaggerated, and suspicion of both women and men, an insult to both women and men. The war of the sexes has definitely came out hardcore in what is happening in Morocco and some other places. Well, I mean, this is something. This is about 30 years ago. So, um, what year did all this happen? Yeah, 1978. So this is 40 years ago. This is about 40 years ago. And one of the things we're finding now is that Morocco is one of those countries where they do not think that people can say their prayers on their own. And you have a lot of people involved in sorcery of one kind or another, either calling on the jinn or doing stuff that would involve the jinn, the shayateen min al jinn. Um, Preference, part of the natural preference given to men in some regards is a result of a lot of the stuff that happens with women, childbirth, the menarche. A lot of these things are by nature more than volition. So the men going off and like the chimpanzees, the women have the smaller domain, and the men go off and do things for the women, bringing things home. There's a lot of there's tales of forgiveness, tales of unforgiveness, tales of the twisted rib, tales of stuff like, now there's a difference of a woman who steals to fulfill her needs, and that includes the husband primarily, and a woman who steals because she's stingy and feels like, oh well, I want to have some backup and all this other stuff. Backup happens when what a woman demands in terms of her dowry. And if it was arranged, now one right is taken away in this society versus Islam, is that a woman has an extra. Not only do people testify about the marriage and everything else, there's somebody testifying on the woman's behalf as a protector of her needs and interest. And that's taken away for a woman who's not a virgin, or whether she's married before or not. The westernized idea of virtue and virginity being the same thing is, it's crept in hardcore. There's, just there's these ideas of saints which are used to either trick people or to encourage people of one way or another. And sometimes, obviously, it would be excused because, you need your fair day in court. The tale of the murderer has changed a little bit from Islam to your Moroccan folktale. Remembering in the name of God for even the simplest of tasks. So the religious can, I'm not speaking too quickly or all that. all of life becomes religious when we do it in God's name, in God's cause. So the very simplest of tasks, we don't have to be a monk. A monk's not really necessary, although a monk is given a higher status in Moroccan culture than Islamic culture. Um, we have the redemption of even the worst of people, the killers, the prostitutes, other people. Um, we have, of course, the preference. All men biologically prefer women without wrinkles. So this culture, I mean, what's with the makeup trying to make you look younger, if that's what's going on? There's less of the fantasy life that leads to unhappy lives and unhappy marriages in what we're seeing portrayed as Moroccan culture here. Like all these Christmas movies where and other movies like that, Hallmark and Ion and all sorts of stuff, where you have the woman's being treated right, or she thinks she's going to be treated right, but there's not the spark there. Or a good arranged marriage and relationships are about treating people right, doing what's good for yourself too. So you don't have to worry about some fantasy, but developing wisdom, seeking joys in art, obviously the more dramatic stories are examples are going to be passed on more, but we got to look at the bigger picture, the picture beyond the neighborhood, a society that works together. Oh, there's another. There's one more term. Difference and sameness is not the. It does not make something an equal, because there's supposed to be equality over all. I'm thinking of a word for one of the tribes. We have the Taurodont, and we have other groups. People become particularly proud to be associated with French or Arab in particular. We can say, in a way, the Arab race has extended far past the Semitic people of what we would have originally called the Semitic people of, the Arabia and Israel and Jordan, and that's basically about it. Because this part European, part African, part Asian group that started in Africa, because the continental divide is up by Turkey, so that's spreading a lot. But the distinctive Arab culture versus the Berber culture got preference. We have long influences from what we'd call Atlantis. The not wanting to be seen as much as a Westerner can protect a person's reputation. Because definitely the prostitutes in that area 40 years ago, they were the ones dressed in, tight blue jeans and tight shirts and, a little cleavage showing and smoking a cigarette and other things that people would stereotype a Westerner of. And the stereotypes go both ways. The people don't look too much at Yeah, beware of guile. Generally, the idea is that the females are not going to just up and abandon their infants. They're going to behave better in the presence of children, which there's a lot of truth to that. But there's also the tales of people who they hide money in the saint's tomb, and one woman supposedly lost her baby, which it was closed up on, and the dent of where the baby was, or the infant, whatever you want to call the young child, stuck because she just wanted to fill up. So instead of making multiple trips and taking her child with her each time, she just wanted to fill up her clothes with some of the silver she found there. And, you know, you find people recite Quran in graveyards and stuff like this, and a lot of practices like that. But I'm gonna leave this off here. Um, but there's a lot more that can be said. The influence of Islam on the culture, different French things, the fact that the language is, people speak a variety of French, and you really got to know what you have to say before you judge one in terms of the other. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.